great. So news around Close Reach, just so that people know, we're moving to a new business management system called Striven that's going to integrate our accounting, our CRM, our ITSM and service management and help desk portals and knowledge management portal all together. So watch for that to be happening over the next month and a half, 2 months thereabouts, I think, before we get everything done. But it should make things a little bit simpler in terms of searching for knowledge management articles and reporting issues and problems. So we're going to an integrated system combining, accounting, ERP, CRM, all of that into one application. We're currently, as we approach year end here, we have a number of projects that are firing up or are still waiting to be fired up because we're still waiting on some contract amendments by our friends at PSBC, and hopefully we'll have that, have those in the next couple of days. Mukhtar is back in town, but there have been some delays getting, I think, with some customer signatures. So that's delayed the amendments for some funding for us. We have 3 new QualiWare customers. One we may have mentioned last month, Canada Council for the Arts here in Ottawa. They're using QualiWare for the CBP, the Collaborative Business Planning add-on that Mike Haley and Bob Boisvert and group have put together. And we also have Barrington Consulting and an organization in Costa Rica who are going to be using QualiWare and on the Close Reach Cloud to do CBP activity-based planning and lean process management work. So that side of it is taking off, and we are supporting that with with the cloud environment that we have in place. So we expect that to continue to grow. QualiWare version 10.4 was released a little while ago, about a week, 2 weeks ago. We got a patch release that touched up a few things. There is 10.4.2 is due to be released in about 2 weeks. It will be not just a patch release, but a feature release, because it will be updating the way labels and some other things are handled from the web modeler. There are some things right now that are not, shall we say, ideal in terms of how QualiWare is handling it from the web modeling space. And they were very quick to point out to me that in the 10.4 release notes, where it discusses the web modeler, they have made it clear that it is not 100% replacement for QLM as yet. And the reason for that is that the web modeling side does not have an active QCL engine running all the time. So if you are in the web modeler doing a business process model, for example, and reuse an existing object on a diagram, if you're in QLM, you know how that little button panel appears that links you to the next. In the web modeler, that button will not appear immediately. And decomposition buttons, for example, normally what you see in a button panel will not appear immediately until that model is saved and until the QCL engine that's running on the integration server picks up that model and publishes it. And at that point only will those button panels or end-to-end connectors become visible. So just something to be aware of. SSC, we've been working with SSC, who have reported some issues with moving between the web modeler and QLM and back to the web modeler with objects being moved, some connectors changing shape, etc. And again, objects being moved, that's a problem. And QualiWare's identified, is working on that bug. And I expect that we will see some resolution for that in 10.4.2. There is a difference, however, in how QLM and the web modeler handles things like orthogonal lines, and the ability in QLM to specify different line formats, and that is not currently supported in the web modeler. And so that is why in some cases you will see some of those unsupported formats, the lines may shift and not be the same as they are in QLM. They are going to continue to enhance that support. The other item that we talked about, and I was talking with QualiWare today, in QLM, you have the ability to open multiple diagrams at the same time. You don't have that ability to do that in the modeling tool. That's an expected feature of version 10.5. So they will continue to enhance the web modeling component, but you know, there are going to remain differences between the two in the near term. But just wanted everyone to be aware of that. But Denise and a few people at SSC have, and we've verified and been troubleshooting some of the issues with objects actually being moved or disappearing off of and this is really specifically very apparent in the BPMN compliant model, the business process model, and the workflow model. So it appears like there's a bug associated with roles or swim lanes, but we're waiting for an update on that from QualiWare, and Jacob could not give that to me when I spoke to him just a short time ago. So, and just to, so people are aware of, what the release notes for 10.4 says. The web modeler and the diagram editor in the Windows client are not identical, and some features are not available in the lighter weight web environment at the present time. Currently, symbols with advanced labels or sub-symbols based on QCL rules are not rendered immediately by the web modeler. This is something that the QCL engine does. So it's only once your diagram is published that some of those things like the button panel or end-to-end connectors will appear. The two environments are updating the same objects in the same repository, and the publishing is controlled by a QCL engine in both cases. In most cases, it'll be correct, but in some cases, there may be some manual adjustment need to be done still in the Windows environment. But the movement of objects or not being visible, that is a bug that they have that they are currently looking at.
Kevin.
Yes.
Did you get into a discussion about the case maker diagrams? Getting mixed messages, right? Jacob, I could have sworn said last meeting, our custom diagrams could be editable, and now that's not the case. Did you get into that discussion to see if it's coming out?
I didn't. And that's something that I've got another meeting set up to discuss that with them specifically.
That's a big deal, right?
I agree.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah. No, I definitely agree.
And I thought
And
Denise was clear on her question last month.
I thought she was as well.
Okay. Thanks.
So that's something we'll be digging in with them into, because if you're making case maker changes, those need to be reflected, from the web modeling side.
Yeah, it's the new diagrams. It's not the existing ones. It's I wanted to create a new one in CaseMaker and support that for me.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. Anybody else have anything around this area as we get word from QualiWare in the next several weeks about 10.4.2? We'll post that on our site, and as well notify the primary, secondary, and technical contacts in every organization that we work with, so that they're aware of that as well. We have Kyril's on the line here. Kyril's been very busy actually building out some help documentation around the HTML feature part of QualiWare. So we've got something that some documentation that we'll be putting up on our website and posting very shortly, that talks about how that gets used. So JR, you had a question about that as well?
Very much. Thank you. Looking forward to reading this.
Yep. So that a PDF that has a number of screenshots and some conversation about how the feature works will be up in the next day or so. We've been updating our training course materials, and in conjunction with getting Roger here to talk tonight, we have a new course up there from Process Renewal Group, and it's Business Process Modeling and Improvement. And we're going to be working with Roger over the next short while to make sure that we've got all of their course dates or custom courses that we may want to deliver, specifically for the Ottawa region or for a specific government department, up and available on our website. So, part of our market, is getting this information out there so that people can access it and find some of the best business architecture training you're ever going to take with Roger and his team. The other thing that's happening, and some of you may have noticed it, we're really promoting our Flex training program, where a department can pre-buy a certain number of days of training, and we're finding a few departments that have some year-end funding available and no way to spend it between now, or take all the training between now and the end of the year, are looking to use that to secure some pretty good priced training. So I was out viewing new office space today. It's very strange viewing new office space in the time of a pandemic. Everybody rode up the elevator one at a time. But our downtown space lease is coming. Space has been empty almost a year now, but our lease comes due at the end of third week of August. And so we're currently looking at our options for new space. We'll be expanding our training facility. So I don't think we'll be where we are now, because we'll be looking at expanding our ability to deliver training, and our team is growing. We're currently looking to hire between 2 and 4 additional resources in our support team to to support the growth we have in the market. So we'll try and keep it as convenient as possible for people, but we'll still be, I believe in the future, we'll still, JR, you won't have to drive to Ottawa anymore to attend user group meetings. We'll still do them online.
Yay, thank you.
Yay.
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 I thought you were talking JR into retirement now, and we'll go work for you right now.
I don't want to travel to Ottawa. Thank you.
No, you don't have to.
Okay. You don't have
well,
to.
and we do take retirees from the government, right, Lise?
True.
Yeah,
She
Lise
started
was,
working at D&D when she was 10. Child labor. Kevin,
and was one of our favorite customers until her retirement, but we're glad to have her back with us at SSC.
Oh, thank you very much. That's so kind.
Go ahead, Cecile.
Kevin, I made you an organizer as well, just in case. Can you click on record on your machine as well, just in case? I lost my connection earlier. So I just want to make sure that we don't lose the recording. My system shows that it still is recording, but I just don't want to take the risk at not being able to capture the rest of the meeting. So are you able to record too?
I've clicked recording, so yep.
Okay, perfect. Yep. All right, there we go. Thank you. All right. So now to our featured speaker today. Not to embarrass him or anything like that, but many of you know Roger through his courses, and it would seem are also members of his fan club. Roger Burlton is the president of Process Renewal Consulting Group, and he's also a co-founder of BP Trends Associates and is regarded globally as a thought leader. Roger chairs several of the largest and most influential business architecture and BPM conferences in the world, and is a sought-after speaker, coach, and trainer. We are very lucky to have him here with us today to talk about freedom within a business architecture framework. And I am going to hand the screen over to Roger. And we did a little test the other day, yesterday I think it was. So now we're all going to hold our breath and make sure that the technology works. And I'm going to hand things over to you, Roger.
So thank you very much. I can now show my screen. I was wondering what I was going to do about that, but here we are. So let me make sure I got the right screen. Again, let's see here. Show my screen, one main monitor. Yep.
Oh, no. Oh, there you go. Perfect.
Yes, we're there. Okay, great. Thank you. You can see the title page, Freedom Within a Framework. That's great.
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, first of all, I'd like to say hi to some of my old friends. Many of the number of people on this call I've met before in training, as you mentioned. And I even have friends here in Vancouver where I am. And for example, Gail. Gail is here in Vancouver, except I haven't seen her in a year. So we'll fix that soon, Gail, I hope. Just really happy to be back with this group. I lived in Ottawa for a long time and worked at more than one of those organizations which we mentioned earlier. But I'm happy to see that we still have just as many acronyms floating around as when I lived there. So it's good to be back again here. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about how we really need some good discipline when we're doing architectural work, but that it's not a cookbook, and we have to be intelligent. We have to solve real problems for real people. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the foundational aspects of business architecture, but I'm also going to take you through some examples of 4 organizations and how they approached it and how they all approach it slightly differently. While they're still consistent with the overall vision of the framework. And so we'll talk through that, and I would encourage questions as we're going. I don't mind that. Putting them in the chat is a good way to do that, or raise your hand, and we'll just discuss it and hopefully have a bit of time at the end to do the same thing. So let's get kicked off with this. Freedom within a framework. I always like to sort of start off any talk I'm giving and say that all you're going to get here is a whole bunch of common sense, and hopefully we can make it common practice. And the first thing around common sense with regard to this is that, you know, as architects, we really do have to understand what the box looks like, what our business is all about. But we can't really do it if we don't understand the edge of the box and what's happening on the outside of the box, because we're only relevant within our own ecosystem. And if we're not making a difference and we don't appreciate what's happening out there, then we won't be successful. We'll do a lot of busy work. We might have a bunch of great models, pictures, diagrams, but we're not really making a difference. So very much focusing on the value in the outside world, and that nothing is important inside if it doesn't make a difference to the outside. That, again, I presume that's very much common sense thinking. So we always start with stakeholder analysis. Who are the stakeholders? What's their interest? What do they care about? What does success look like for them? And how does everything that they do connect up to what we have to do? So that's going to be something I think is going to be important. So, but if we look at business architecture today, there's so many drivers and so many sort of variations that might be needed for people doing business architecture work. And the real question then is, do we know the why? And I'm working with a number of organizations right now, like 5 or 6 different clients right now. And you know, a major driver quite often is that there's a significant IT system replacement. Software is going out of license. It's no longer going to be supported. And so quite often people say, well, I'm doing this ERP or CRM type of implementation. Maybe this is a good time to rethink the business while we're at it. And hopefully it's going to be that we're not just going to try to replace functionality for functionality. We have the opportunity to do work better. We're just changing the software, then that's not going to be much fun. You don't need a whole lot of business architecture if you're going to do that. And I hear these words all the time: business transformation, business transformation. Everybody's transforming their business. Well, that's actually a wonderful thing to do, but I've actually stopped talking about business transformation now, because I believe much more in establishing an environment of business agility. Because we got on these 5-year transformation programs, if you're lucky. I know some of the things in Ottawa have gone much longer than that. And you get through the transformation, you say, whew, boy, we're done. Wasn't that hard, but we got through it. I wonder what we're going to do next week. And I know the answer is we're going to start another business transformation, because we're always in transformation mode. So I think we have to really be thinking much more in terms of how do we establish an environment where we can make business changes much more easily and know the impact of change of anything we are going to touch on everything else that's taking place. We've done a lot of work with integrating companies, whole companies acquiring other ones, trying to bring them together. You need to get your business models and operating models together. Another good buzzword we're hearing is digital. I tend to talk about digitalization as opposed to digital as a technology. We are actually bringing digital capability to the work that we do, and the interface and the work we do, and the work that customers do or service recipients do. How do we make all that digital? Well, if you don't have your data act together, you don't have your process act together, then you're going to be basically building out unique capabilities which just won't work. I've got to share that data. I've got to connect the dots on the process. A lot of people are looking at things like master data management. That's a big issue. So many buzzwords right now. Customer experience management, operational excellence, design thinking, innovation. You hear this stuff all the time, but without a solid foundation to sort of understand how all the pieces move, you're going to be somewhat in trouble. That's what the little hexagon on the right says, is that, yeah, I may have to touch information, I may have to look at processes, I may have to look at technologies, I may have to look at competencies in people and motivation and organization and locations and strategy and policies and rules. All these things are in play. So if you touch one, you're going to mess up something else if you don't have your architecture act together. So there's lots of choices, lots of challenges along the way. So what are your business drivers? If you want to put a couple in the chat, I'd be happy to look at those. Why is business architecture important to the place that you work or to you personally? Let's get a couple of things in there at least and get people participating a bit. But what is it that's driving you towards looking at business architecture? Or is anybody looking towards business architecture?
And don't be shy, everyone.
No, one or two things in there. So I'm just curious of what's happening in Ottawa these days. Anything? Anything at all? Understanding business process flow. Thank you, Mike. Yes, because, you know, understanding how work gets done. That's really what we're saying, right? Basically, impact analysis is really, really important too. If I touch something, what else? Am I going to get any unintended consequences? Implementing a digital strategy. That's right. So we have to know what it's all about. Oh, now they're coming. Okay. Connecting the dots on end to end. Exactly. You know, I really love the expression connect the dots. And I must say, I was in Australia one time being very, very drunk after a session at the end of the day. And we all got around and said, what's our job? Well, our job is to connect the dots. And somebody said, well, we have to collect them first. So we have to collect the dots and then we have to connect the dots. And then we went through the alphabet. We can only find one more that worked, and that was correct. So we need to collect, connect, and correct the dots. That's our job, right? Investment prioritization, duplicate processes, corporate memory. Yeah, Rick, I mean, we all walk out there and nobody has any clue what happened. And SharePoint sites are not going to solve that problem, right? And Ray, tracking technology enablement back to the business priority. Again, we're connecting the dots vertically now, right? And so basically a fool with a tool is still a fool. Thank you, Diane. Good to see you here, actually. So yeah, there's a lot of good reasons why we need to sort of think about this as something that's going to be important to us, right? So really what we're saying here is that if I just take that first diagram and say, well, I have this challenge that I'm interacting with the outside world, but if I look at the inside, there's so many moving parts and there's so many things. And if I touch one, do you have any idea what else is impacted by that? And that really is the question. What is the implication of making a change? And this comes out of the Business Agility Manifesto that I worked on with John Zachman and Ron Ross to basically say, we've really got to know the impact of change. We've got to know the impact of making some adjustments. But if we don't build the connections in the first place, we can't do the tracing. And that's the challenge sometimes with business transformation, is we build all these models up because of a transformation, but then nobody manages or sustains that knowledge. And so I think we have a very big issue with regard to, do we have stewardship, ownership, whatever you want to call it? Do we have people responsible for maintaining the knowledge? Because it's an asset. And you know, otherwise we're going to go right back into another major change and start fresh every single time, because what we had before is completely out of date, right? But we still got lots of good things coming. Well-informed decision making. Customers cannot provide business requirements. No, they can't. You know, sometimes we make a big assumption that customers actually know what they want, they know what they need. A lot of the time they have no idea. Or matter of fact, it might even be worse if one person thinks they've got all the answers without really understanding the implications on everything else that they're not expert in. So that's a bit of a challenge. And now some people have responded by doing this. You know, you have all kinds of information flowing in and out of this box in the middle, and they go crazy and build these detailed, complex models. This is a real company, a real example. And there's two lines to this. There's the top line and the bottom line. But this was their attempt, 3 months to build out a whole bunch of process models way down to the detailed level. And after 3 months, they gave up. And we were already working with them in other areas. And they said, can you look at this? I said, yeah. I said, can you explain it? I said, no. Can you? No. Okay, we just wasted 3 months drawing a diagram. But it doesn't make it an architecture just because it's a model or a diagram or a flow. Nobody can possibly cover all of this. And so we were able to solve the problem with a 4x4 matrix, which just changed all the decision making and left everything up to the individuals and so on. But we used an architected approach instead. So then ultimately, architects starting in the weeds and working their way down. Oh yeah, they already, then they go into even more detail. So I really think that the ultimate payoff from business architecture is the ability to modify dynamically the concepts and structures of the business itself. That's actually a John Zachman quote. And so that means we have to have the business knowledge of the business to be able to reconfigure, and also to keep business operations as the changes are formalized. It's like a good friend of mine here who works at British Columbia Hydro said that their job is to rewire their house while they still have the lights on. And I think that's the challenge, right? We can't stop everything we're doing in order to get it all figured out. We tried that 10, 15 years ago with things like information engineering, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, maybe I'm a bit too optimistic. But you know, we cannot just try to stop everything. We won't get the permission. So you have to sort of be somewhat evolutionary. While we have a revolutionary idea, but the implementation tends to be evolutionary. And that's why I'm going to show you the different models a bit later. But the framework within which I want some freedom is what we've got defined here. And we do have the class that Kevin was talking about before, and a bunch of people on this call have been on that class before, where we sort of look at what are the major phases. Well, we have to define the business, and quite often architects don't get to define the business, but the architects have to really understand that business and translate it, the knowledge of it, into a form that's usable, so we can build out the appropriate models. And so, yeah, the business model might change. It's like what business are we in? In the ecosystem, I've got external pressures, I got stakeholders, people I'm interacting with. We try to derive out of that, it's just something simple that we call the North Star, just a handful of objectives, and I'll talk a bit more about that, as well as strategic requirements, which could be critical success factors. So to give you an example, one organization we were working with, they said that in each country operation of this global company was given a mandate that says in the next 5 years, over the next 5 years, we want you to grow your business at 15% per year, compounded, which means double in 5 years. The only problem was the business they were in was growing at 2% per year. The industry was growing at 2% per year. So yeah, it's great to say double your business, but how the heck am I going to do that? So we help them look at what are the strategic requirements. And just so two things pop to the top: critical success factors. Well, number one, bring new categories of product to market. So new products to market. So the ability to, or the capability, if you want to call it that, the capability of bringing products to market faster and better products and more attractive products in market better. That was an absolutely critical capability that they had to have. The second one was they had to be able to identify, acquire, and integrate new companies, because they're going to have to buy market share. So these strategic requirements were in response to the stated objectives that the organization had. Now, as architects, we can help package that, but we don't usually get to define what that strategy is going to be. But if I want to move into design the business, I'm going to have to understand that well, so I can define my business concepts information, my business processes, my business capabilities, and my ability to measure how all that's happening. So this is usually the brownish colored section there is usually the part where, as business architects, we spend a lot of time. And that's important. But if we don't know where we're going with it all, then you can have great pictures, but not much use. Then we move over to build the business. So the first thing, bottom left corner, by the way, notice all these iterate, iterate, iterate. That's what the circles are for. As we go to build the business, the first thing we want to do is start in that bottom left corner and say, what are the priorities? What is the heat map? What are the heat maps? What are the priorities? What's the roadmap? What's the portfolio? And then building out those resources in the bottom right corner of that. Then after that, we operate. We live happily ever after. We start executing the business, measuring performance according to the performance indicators that are important, tracing all the way back to the North Star, making sure we have sustainment of the models and the business, end-to-end management, and we can do continuous improvement. So this is sort of the framework that we're going to work within and try to build some of these things out. I'm going to show you how various people sort of took a different cut at what that looked like. So now I'm going to pose another question to you. If I pull a few of those things over here, what are you working on right now? What are the aspects that, but you have to start somewhere. You have to focus on something. You're going to have some major drivers. What are you looking at? Is it business capabilities? Is it process models and value streams, strategy, the roadmap, business rules? Just give me some of the things that you think are within your domain to tackle at this point in time. You know, a slow start again, are we? Or none of you do. So business processes are really quite important for everybody, for one person at least. Strategic objectives, capabilities, value streams, right? The classic business architecture stuff, information technology, business processes, capabilities, yeah. And typically you usually have a sort of one area that sort of sticks out a little bit. But I think what we're going to see in our challenge is that if you want to talk about capabilities and you don't talk about value streams or processes, good luck. You'll have a whole bunch of things that nobody can use. You want to talk about information, but you don't talk about processes and capabilities, you really don't know how that information is created, where else it's used, and if I move it, what else is, like what's affected by changing the information. So objectives, benefits, Lily, objectives, benefits, outcomes, capability, value stream. Hey, good luck with all that, Lily. You got a lot of things going on, but that's great if you can get them all connected, right? Mike's saying resource planning and costing, absolutely, because ultimately all of this is going to say, well, what resources do I need, both human and technological, maybe even physical. So there's a lot of things to think about. That's really all this slide really says. So understand where you want to go first. And again, I'm going to show this a bit later. So
Roger, I noticed that,
yeah.
Sorry to jump in there. I noticed
go ahead.
JR has his hand up. I don't know if that's
JR,
on purpose,
yeah,
JR?
Yeah, please speak up. I'm just going on, not paying attention.
No, and that was me not paying attention from Kevin's point. So no, all good here.
Okay, no worries. Okay, no
okay,
problem.
So still there from before. Okay, good. We don't want Kevin coming back in, do we?
No, thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Hey, not nice.
Hey, I'll never get the microphone back. So I'm glad we all know Kevin well. So anyway, what we're saying here is, if we want to be effective as a business, and I mean the business architecture is a means to an end. It's not the end. Sometimes we forget that. We think we're in the business of business architecture, but really it has to make a difference. And so there's typically different perspectives that people take. Is it all about where we aim, the strategy? Is it about all the work we do, which are the processes? Is it about business information, the things we have to know? Is it about business capabilities? Because we have to build the capabilities. Otherwise, I can't do what I need to do or know what I need to know. And is it just about performance? Are we performing well? And so the different lenses that different executives are going to take different point of view. Depending on who you talk to, you might get a different answer. So that's why as architects, it's really, really hard if you get the executives disagreeing on what success looks like. So that's why we got to work the North Star out so early, so we don't have to fight that all the way through our architecture. Of course, so these three things we tend to think about the most. So our process architecture, or if you want to call them value streams, you can. Talk a bit more about that a bit later. Information and capabilities tend to be the three main things we tend to talk about. Now, the emphasis is going to be different depending upon the challenges, the external realities. Like, do I have a major political change? Let's say, thank goodness we're not there. But if I were in the US right now and I'm working in the US government, this political change that's happening is going to change all the drivers, and it's going to change your emphasis. So one or more of these is going to show up. If you depending upon your industry, if I'm in the tech industry, I know my capabilities are going to be a very big emphasis. I'm all about technology. I have to build stuff that can be easily adapted and snapped together and taken apart. If I'm in like the news business, it's going to be about information. That's where I'm going to start. What information needs do I have? If I'm a manufacturer or distributor of physical goods, it's about my processes, because I have to get my operations working very smoothly, seamlessly. Financial services, it might be a bit of a combination, right? Might be a combination of process and capability. And also, if you're an organization that's all about operational excellence, smooth operations, you're going to focus on process. If you're all about customer intimacy, you better have all the information in one place. If you're all about innovation, I want to be able to undo and redo my capabilities quickly. Of course, all of them are in play. And so the question is, where do you want to spend your time? So you come back and say, okay, if you're strategy driven, you really want to connect. I think Ray mentioned this earlier. I think that basically I want to connect what I'm doing on the front lines back up to my strategy. Well, it means I really need to understand my strategy, and different people are going to have different goals, right? Different stakeholders. So customers have a different driver than the owners or the people governing or controlling us or regulating us. The staff have a different point of view, right? By the way, notice here that we've shown staff as external stakeholders and not internal stakeholders. And the reason for that is they don't have to work for you if they don't want to. They can go somewhere else. If you have a very bad working environment and they all leave, good luck with customer service. So we actually treat them as human beings, which is a remarkable approach, in their own right, so that they can be happy in what they're doing. Of course, a bit of preaching there, but basically we do have to understand the outside world, and there's going to be conflict. There's going to be conflict with regard to these different points of view. So depending upon your strategy, which one are you going to emphasize is going to be important. So what is important to those stakeholders then? The first thing we talk about is, what do we exchange with them? What information do we exchange? What permissions do we exchange? And what rules do we give them for what they're allowed to do if they're filing a claim or basically putting in their tax forms and so on? Information is flowing back and forth. It could be physical things as well, but for most people here, I think it's more information. So basically, it's this issue of, first of all, what is it that we exchange? And so this little diagram on the top left here, we tend to call this a context diagram. It's the simplest way to figure out what your business is all about. Once you scope what you're going to architect, what goes in and what goes out, what are all the things we have to do? Because if I look at this customer one, and if I receive an order request, that's going to go inside the box. And all of a sudden, the processes have to click in, the capabilities have to be used, the information has to be processed, and other work has to be done to get the product out to them, and an invoice with it. And then I got to do something with the payment. The point being is, everything coming in and out of this box has got to connect. Otherwise, it's an orphan, and we don't allow orphans in business architecture. So getting the changed item is absolutely critical. The next thing we talk about is, well, so what's the benefit of all of that? So quite often people focus on the thing, and as architects, it's easier to focus on what exchanges. It's much harder to figure out, so why do they care? So right now I'm working with a credit union in Alberta, and we're dealing with the mortgage business. And so they're all happily talking around the mortgage documents and the application and the forms and the stuff that goes to the lawyer. But we sort of pulled the whole thing back and said, hang on a second, what is it that the applicant cares about? And there's only a few things. One of them is, did you fund me? Or sorry, did you approve me? The next one is, did you fund me? Did my money show up on time? Why is that an important expectation of benefit? Because if you give me a pre-approval, now I can go shopping. If you approve the mortgage, now I can close the deal. If you give me my money on time when I'm closing, now I can move in. That's the benefit. It's not the document, it's not the money. It's, yes, you have to have that, but you really have to think through, so what? Like, so what is the benefit? Because if I get all the documents right, but I don't fund you, then and you're left out in the cold and you can't move in, then there's an issue. The third one of these is going to be experience. So when we're looking at value for the outside world, I want to basically look at all this stuff. So what's the experience like? What we found in this particular organization we're working with is sometimes we get the right documents, we get the money to you on time, but the customer says, thank you very much, but I'll never work with you again. I don't need to come into the branch office 4 times to sign what I think is the same paperwork over and over and over again when I'm supposed to be working. So the experience itself, it can be a digital experience or it can be a human experience. So these are the 3 aspects we look for. What is it? What do we care about? And what was it like working with you? So when we're looking for what the value is, aspects of business value, we're looking at all 3 of these particular items. Now, out of that, we can produce our North Star, the highest priority items. And so if what we tend to look at here is, this is just an example of a bank. We have a mission, we have a vision. We're going to be all about customer intimacy. But on the bottom, you can see what are the North Star statements. So what does a successful architecture do for you? It's going to allow me to increase wallet share by 5%. It's going to allow me to increase market share by 7%. I'm going to increase services by a certain number. Just sign my RSP electronically. Don't need to go to the bank branch. Great, right? Excellent. Now, however, if the experience could have been wonderful, Lily, but if they mess up the transaction, then you don't have what's good for you either. So you got all 3 of them got to be done. Anyway, decrease errors, sustain regulatory compliance. So these are the 5 things. We'd like to go for 5 because it looks pretty on the page when you draw it out. And we're going to evaluate how important is that. So we're saying wallet share and market share are about 30% of my consideration. That's the most important to me. Regulatory compliance, yeah. I mean, I'm pretty good already, so I'm not going to count that high. So it starts to show us what to emphasize. And later on, when we do prioritization, we're going to match every possibility, every possible capability, every possible process. We're going to map it against these criteria and say, let's work on the ones that move the needle the most. And it allows us to do that as architects without arguing with the business people who are already arguing with themselves. Because somebody says, I like A, I like B, I like C. And you need the criteria for making the decision. This is really, really important as an architect. Really understand what's driving the things that you're trying to do, because you're not going to be able to knock it all off in one go. So
this is Walter.
Yeah,
going
Walter.
back to the previous slide, I have a question on the number of strategic objectives. You
Right.
put 5 there. That seems like good. However, would 3 be better or worse, or would 10 or 20 be too excessive?
Yeah, I think 10 or 20 certainly is too excessive because people can't focus. Right? The nice thing about North Star, we can all see it. We can all find it. If it's 3, it tends to be a bit more skewed towards one factor. Notice here, like the customer one is wallet share and market share. And we have some other ones here too. I mean, but I can hit wallet share and market share for a little while if I don't worry about compliance. So I tend to want to sort of balance them out a little bit. It's a bit of a balanced scorecard, but it's basically built around what you're trying to do in the outside world.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Roger, there's a question from Michael, and I also want to go
Yeah.
back to a comment from Ray.
Ray, okay.
Michael's
Okay, good.
asking, are those North Star objectives related to each of the stakeholders?
Yeah, yes, they are. But what you're going to find is some of the objectives relate to more than one stakeholder. So quite often we see that something which is important to a customer is also important to an employee. No employee wants to do a crappy job every day, and a lot of them are frustrated by the same things that customers are, because their technology won't allow them to do what makes sense. So the ones which are going to get the highest weighting will be the ones which affect the most number of stakeholders. So this is a negotiation, but I'd rather have this negotiation up front rather than when I'm in the middle of trying to prioritize. So my rule is always get the criteria agreed before you dive in and start arguing over various options. Ray had a comment. Yeah, need to stimulate business line interest to engage in a strategy. Yes, of course. Yeah, I agree. Demonstrate the business value of having to engage before they commit to. Yes. And this is sometimes why what we'll do is, in order to get going with this, we'll take something of a smaller scope, which is recognized as being painful, and get a good solution in place and build our own credibility, because we do have to build the credibility. Especially the larger it is, the less likely we're going to get to go in right off the top, unless we've already shown that we can add value ourselves, definitely. So, okay, so let's keep going. Now, a few other things here. I'm coming back to the context diagram. I think you can say a lot of this is business information driven, but I would tend to call it more of the semantics vision, semantic framework, the concept model, the business concept model. And if any of you have been reading the BizBook from Business Architecture Guild, they would tend to call it a business object model. And I think in enterprise architecture, we sort of called it that. But I really want a model that defines what are the semantics we use, what are the concepts, what are the words we use. I've been working with a regulatory body, which I'll show a little bit later, that certifies, authorizes, permits people to, change electrical systems and gas systems and elevating devices and all those types of things. They make sure it's safe. But in that organization, we had words like certification, licensing, permitting, risk, hazard, incidents, crisis, violation, penalties, fines. We had all these words all floating around, and everybody understood them differently. And so even just getting the difference between a certification, which is for an individual, a license, which is for a company, and a permit, which is for a particular piece of equipment, getting that straight was gold when we came to doing the rest of the architecture. Especially given that each of those technologies, like the electrical, gas, and so on, each of them were basically running their own mini business inside the organization. And we're trying to get a new vision, and we're trying to get a new technology stack in place to support it. We didn't want 7 variations of that technology, but we started with this concept model, which is very much based upon something called SBVR, which is a standard from OMG. And it's simple, right? It's simple to look at. In this case here, a customer places an order. The order authorizes a financial transaction, but the customer must have committed to a financial system, a financial service agreement, so we can price the order. The order secures a financial service. The financial service could be constrained by regulation, which comes from a regulator. These are just pure logic or pure concept of how do things work together. And this is worth its weight in gold, because we don't have an understanding of what the words mean. It's going to show up. These words are going to show up in your business rules. They're going to show up in your capabilities. Matter of fact, a good capability model should be directly taken from a concept model, not a process model. And so these are the things I have to know about, right? I have to have order management. I have to have customer relationship management. I have to have agreement management. I have to have partnership agreements. Or they ask the question, is a partnership agreement the same as a financial services agreement? I'll come to this in just a moment. But understanding the words is absolutely, absolutely critical in our experience. And it solves so many problems downstream when you get different people using the same words for different things or different words for the same thing. This, as architect, we've had this problem since day one. So I want to get that right. Now, if it's process driven, this is an example of something called, this is basically I'm trying to remember the right name, the civil resolution. So if somebody drives over your flowers in your front garden and it's your neighbor and you have an argument with them, the whole idea is don't take them to court. But what we do here is we actually have the ability to have a peer-to-peer, completely digital resolution service that was put in place. And if that resolution service doesn't work, then you can go to facilitation. If that doesn't work, then you can go to court. So the whole idea here was keep things out of court. So what they did, they started with the court process and they extended this process end to end to end, or the two ends at least. And so we built a whole new service with Ministry of Justice in British Columbia to be able to support a whole new way of people to interact with each other and solve things. And so we used business architecture, a complete set of business architecture artifacts to figure out what this was going to look like, because it was brand new. So even though it was a new service, we needed processes, we needed capabilities, we needed information, we needed stakeholders to figure all that stuff out. And ultimately, you will build a process architecture, which basically says I have a number of different value chains, value streams. In this case, I've got things at level. So at various levels, provide consumer services, which is comprised of win new customers, which is comprised of make them aware, inform, qualify, and agree to services. Multiple levels of a process architecture, along with guiding processes and enabling processes, where the guiding processes give us the policies and rules and constraints. The enabling processes give us the reusable resources to do the work. So getting this on the page, if you're going after the process-based approach, this is going to be really, really, really worthwhile for you. So now, if you're capability driven, then you're going to start to look at, like the previous diagram I showed you. There were several stakeholders in that. I had customers, I had partners, I had a number of different stakeholders there. Well, can I have one capability at the high level called stakeholder relationship management? And can I just have different instances, slight variations for consumer versus partner versus regulator? And these are basically nested capabilities, lower, more detailed level. And I have several places where I've got agreement. So, but is a agreement with a partner different than agreement with the consumer, or is it essentially the same? Right now I'm working with an organization that does that manages equipment. They auction equipment. They're the biggest in the world. They are Canadian, and they have identified something like 78 different types of agreements, because they keep acquiring companies, all of whom have different agreement types. And so we've got this major effort underway to try to bring agreements down to one set of capabilities that can be used regardless of the type of services they're providing. So they've been very capability centric because they have so many different disparate systems, all of which are falling apart. And so we're trying to sort of take that based approach. So what I'm saying here is there is no right place to start, but you are going to have to connect the dots up to the other ones. And just to sort of get this process versus capability argument hopefully out of the way once and for all, because it's been raging for 15 years, is this is a diagram that we produce working with as part of the Business Architecture Guild process versus business architecture working team. So as process renewal group, we basically proposed this, and it's been accepted, and it's now in the latest version of the BizPOC, where you basically say you can have value streams at the top and stages, but that's also the process structure. And that structure can help you with your processes, go down all the way down to workflows. It can also help you define your capabilities. So in this particular case here, a value stream stage is going to have multiple capabilities in play. And the processes will need capabilities in order to do their job. And the capabilities will basically show up in processes. The point being, this is a many-to-many relationship. And so what this should blow away is that processes are subordinate to or a component of a capability. That model just does not work anymore. It never did, by the way. But it was basically put out there. If you go deep enough in your capabilities, you find your processes. What you find is process snippets, but what you won't find is end-to-end processes connected to customers and other stakeholders. They're not within the same stack. They're different stacks, and they're associated with one another. So your architecture has to be able to say, if I'm touching this process, what are all the capabilities that are used for this process to work? And if I'm dealing with this capability, what are all the processes that are required for this? I'm also working with right now with the Saskatchewan a Saskatchewan organization does driver's licensing and insurance and things like that. And what we've discovered over there is one of the things they do is they actually need identity. So they have a capability called identity management. So the identity management capability is used all over the place. But what do I want? I want one identity management capability used everywhere, as opposed to each part of the organization goes out and defines its own identity management. By the way, the driver's license is also an identity, so they're on both ends of that equation. So knowing how they fit together is going to be really quite important, right? So understanding how those things go. So Kevin, so it's safer to say that there are specific activities enabling capabilities as opposed to processes. Well, now what I'm really going to say here is a capability is more than the process. What we're saying here is identity management is the activities, the process. It's going to be the business rules and the policies. It's going to be the information that's being dealt with. It's going to be the roles that are required in order to do it. So this is why capability is quite often misunderstood as either being another form of process or a piece of technology. It's a whole bunch of those things. So Ray, you got right on. Maintaining the linkage between capability and all of the EA domain designs, including is exactly what you're hoping QualiWare will help us with. QualiWare will help us with. The thing is, there's no possible way, Ray, that, and I think you know this, that there's no possible way you can keep this in your head. You have to have the models that connect the dots. And this is why you need QualiWare.
Plus, we need various target instances of the capability models and all the other models.
Right on. Now you think about that, it's a lot of work to do it. And this is what we're saying is what is going to be a good strategy to tackle this. But just finish the last part of these four quadrants here. Don't forget performance. Don't forget, I have to measure my effectiveness. I have to measure my efficiency. I should also measure my quality. Quality really means compliance. How well do I comply to standards? How well do I comply to regulatory requirements and so on? And agility is, well, how easily can I change something? So Kevin again, so don't use capability to guide process definition and modeling, but use processes to identify capabilities required. Well, I would actually say, I can't finish my capability model if I don't have a pretty good process model. But also, if I've got a good capability model, it will help me identify my processes, especially as you go to the details. You tend, the lower levels, sort of sub-capabilities tend to map more to sub-level of processes. And that's really where where we get into trouble. At the highest level, it's a bit, it looks a bit trivial. But when you get down into the details, 3-4 levels deep, then you can start to see it. I really need to know both. But I would never personally. Now I'm very much a process bigot. I would agree with that. I would never start with capabilities without sort of considering what are these capabilities going to be used for. And I talk about identity management. In British Columbia, we worked on identity management for British Columbia. And if I look at my driver's license and I flip it over, I'll see my health card number. So they've got one identity management, which I use for health and for driver's licensing. But it's their vision in BC to have one identity management for anything you want to do, even applying for a job in the government. We can identify who you are. Somebody pulls you over, so you're a police officer, you want to pull somebody over the side of the road. I want to know whether there's a risk in that car. So I want to connect all these things up so I can basically build it once. And what they did in BC, they set up a separate organization that only offers up a SOA service, which is identity management, and all government departments must use it or rationalize why they can't. So again, this is what we're trying to get reusables and things we can snap together or be called upon and give us very flexible business processes and very flexible business solutions. That's what we're trying to do. By the way, these measures go up and down. In other words, as I go into more detail, I should find the lower level measures connect up to what's going to be important at the top, which is my North Star measures or my strategic measures. I want to connect the dots this way too. And I can build my scorecard this way, just based upon my architecture structure. So Ray, we also need to track the evolution of the service inventory as the implementation. Okay, yes, absolutely. So when I talk about business architecture, I'm talking about getting the processes and the capabilities and the information all in sync. But if you want to connect into more of the particular solutions, you might have a microservice strategy. If you have a microservice strategy, you will connect it to your capabilities. I don't need to connect it to my process because my capability is connected to my process. And if I connect it up to my capabilities, I can trace it, I can follow it, right? So the business case driver, the value VA, absolutely. But you've got to have that business architecture sitting in between strategy and enterprise architecture, or consider it to be part of enterprise architecture. So let's just talk a little bit about heat mapping. Okay, so really what I want to do with heat mapping, I want to look at two things. And this is not normal in a lot of places. I've seen this so many cases where I've seen people do a business architecture map, and they do the capability map, and then they heat map the capabilities, and they heat map them red, yellow, green, or some other colors as well. And so what we find is that then the capabilities that get prioritized are the ones that are most badly broken, but there's no connection to strategy. So what I want to do is I want to connect to strategy. Which are the things where if I got it, if it was really, really working well, really make a big difference to our strategy, and yet at the same time, which are the ones that are most badly broken? So and I can do this on my processes, my capabilities. I can pick information areas, and I can map any of these this way. So if I go to the right, it means it's more important to the business, more important to the North Star. And if I go to the top, I can say this particular area, whichever domain I picked on, is far from where I need it to be. So if I'm going to give you an example of something using the process domain, because that's sort of where I come from, but you can do it for other things as well. What I'm saying here is that if I go to the right and try to triage this a bit, the processes on the right, like 5, 7, and 9, are really, really important to achieving our strategy. The processes on the left, yeah, we got to do them, but we don't have to be world class. Whereas the ones over here will differentiate you. The ones in the middle, you've got to be good at it, and maybe best practice, maybe the same as everybody else. But being better doesn't pay off. In other words, if you're the best in the world, the people you're dealing with don't need you to be the best in the world. You just spend a lot of money becoming best in the world on something which is not strategically differentiating. So this is why you need the North Star. The processes or capabilities you want to look at in the right will be the ones that will move the needle on the North Star the most. So we actually have formal ways of mapping all this stuff out. Whereas the ones over here are really quite interesting. So let me tell you a little bit of story about number 8. A good friend of mine is he's president of Canada Lands Corporation. He's Ottawa based, but Canada Lands Corporation is in Toronto. He's CEO of that organization, and they basically take federal lands and properties and repurpose them, and sometimes develop them and put them out in the marketplace on behalf of the Canadian government. I went to his office one day, and he said, "Oh, you come up to the floor higher than you normally come up to, and I want to show you something new. It's really, really cool." I said, "Okay, that's fantastic." So, by the way, the top row here means that you're badly broken, right? And so, he brought me into the office, and he pulled out his iPhone and started playing with his iPhone, and the windows started self-tinting. It's sort of like what you might see on the 787 aircraft, right? So the windows are self-tinting. And I said, "Well, oh, that's really cool." He said, "Yeah, it was really expensive, but it's really cool." And I said, "Well, why did you do it?" He said, "Well, it was getting really hot in here in the afternoon." So my response was, did you really have to be world class in having self-tinted windows? Or could you have put blinds on the windows for much less money? Did you really need to do that? So if you focus on 8 as being broken, but not important, then you're going to waste your money. And the problem is you're going to have people in your business we're all pitching to do the number 8s. And so, whereas if I want to spend my money in the right place, I should spend my money on number 9. That's where my money should go. By the way, the executives love this page. It really goes over well because they can see on a simple page where they should be paying and spending their attention. This is the outcome from linking the strategy to the architecture, and now I can come up with priority. Of course, I have to figure out, exactly what it means to change number 9 into something better. But if I'm going to if I take process number 9, this is the key thing now. I'm going to have to look at this diagram. Let's say process number 9 is this red process over here. Well, that's great. If I go try to fix that process, I'm going to have to look at which capabilities does that process use. It might use a bunch of them, but these 2 that it uses are also red. So if I want to fix this process, and I've also got information area where we're weak too. So I've got to look at the other 2 areas. And here's the problem. If basically this process impacts this capability, which is not working well as far as this capability is concerned, I also have to look at all the other processes that capability touches, because if I fix it for the red one, I might make it worse for the blue ones. And so this is what Ray was talking about. You really have to know the connections here, because before I launch into fixing that capability, I've got to know what's the impact on everything else that I'm doing. And so this is where your roadmap really would come out of it, right? So, this to me is really ultimately where the payoff comes. No, and I talked about this earlier. If I am, yes, the law of unintended consequences. And by the way, I mean, without unintended consequences, there's a whole bunch of people working in our field who wouldn't have a job, because we wouldn't have more and more things to do, because my favorite expression says the main cause of problems is solutions. So we keep generating that. But there's many things to look at as well. I think that's the point here, that it could be your policies are messed up. It could be your technologies are messed up. It could be your workflow or your information quality is off. It could be that you've got the wrong incentive for people, or they're not trained to do the work. All of these things need to be questioned. So if I really want to talk about a capability, I want to talk about the whole business capability where all of these things might play. I realize I'm being a little bit idealistic. So let's have a bit of a look at this. So let's get into some of the examples. How well aligned are these domains? Some are more complete or more mature than others? I bet they are. So let's just walk through a few examples here. This is the technical safety regulator that I talked about before. And so this organization, given that their technology stack was going out of sync, given that they keep getting more technology areas to manage, and they kept sort of just bolting them onto the side of the business, they realized they had to really step back and see what was going on. So the approach there was, number one, build a comprehensive context model. In other words, don't go inside the box, look at all the exchanges on the outside, and then build out the concept model so everybody had a common language to work with. It was only then we could start to look at the process architecture, and that process architecture got drilled down a couple of levels, and then we then looked at all of those and said, well, what are the requirements for these processes to be successful? And we did that for, I think, 19 out of about 30 high-level processes. And then we looked at what the capability requirements were for each, and we rationalized those so we had shared capabilities. Then they went to IT requirements, went out to RFP, and they hired a firm to come in and do that, to do the actual work. It was interesting. It was so together that the firm that came in, when they won the bid, when they demonstrated, they actually demonstrated solutions, because the models that they were given were strong enough for them to infer what the solution might start to look like, and everybody was on the same page. So then they acquired and implemented, and now they're in the process. Well, they're in the process, still process doing that, because they're in phases. But now they're also trying to make sure that there's a cultural realignment, not only inside the company, but also in the marketplace, that you know, as they move from a model of just pay for licenses where they make all their revenue to basically going to empowerment, accountability, and much more of a safety culture in the marketplace. And so this is what they did. So their models look basically like this. The context, one of two context models is on the left-hand side. So we have things at the top like licensed contractors, contractors who aren't licensed yet, training providers, qualified professionals, asset owners, all the things that they exchange. Then inside the box, they had to make it happen somehow. And then on the right-hand side is the concept model that basically says a contractor obtains a license. A license is required for a permit. A bond is required for a permit. A permit is required to practice regulated work, is required to perform regulated work. It's simple logic, but they argued it. There was a lot of arguments over what these were. Because if we didn't get this straight, though, it would have showed up in everybody giving different sets of requirements for what really needed to take place. And of course, this concept model is the foundation for the information model and the database structure as you go from concept to logic to physical models. They help both of those things. But it was critical for processes too, because we look at something saying permit. Well, then we ask the question, what are all the processes that deal with permits? What's the life cycle of a permit? From it doesn't exist till it's over, all the things that happen in between. So we're able to sort of ask the questions about what capabilities do we need? There's a permitting capability, there's information and processes all sort of touched on this. But that was their approach. Let's look at another one. Public Service Agency. This is a transit corporation. Again, I'm in British Columbia here. BC Transit Corporation was moving from very, very separate roles. And so in order for transit to work in British Columbia, other than TransLink in Vancouver itself, you have municipalities who determine what routes the bus takes, what schedule the bus takes, where to put the bus stops, where to pave the side of the road to do things. That's the municipality's responsibility. We have the Transit Corporation that sets all the rules, sets the fares, and does things like that. And they're also they're in the governance over everything that happens. And we have the bus operating companies. So there's something like 60-something municipalities, more than 50 bus operating companies. And in order to have effective transit, they all have to work together. So we help them facilitate the coming together of the business architecture for this. And we had workshops of 140 people at a time, I swear. It's like we had to break them into component parts, have it all work together properly. It was a real feat in facilitation. But at the end of it, doing the stakeholder analysis was really, really key. Because at the beginning, people were saying, well, we all know that cleaner buses and friendly bus drivers are really important. So why don't we focus on that? And then somebody then asked the question, well, does that mean if you've got a clean bus and a friendly bus driver, that people will get on it, even if it doesn't take them where they want to go? Even it means it's really inconvenient, so they would prefer to drive their car. So this whole stakeholder analysis, including municipalities and bus operating companies and employees, was done first to figure out how do all the dots have to sort of connect up logically. Then building out the process architecture, which I'll show you in a moment. Then doing the prioritization to focus on the top issues, doing capability design for the top ones over a period of time. IT requirements, focusing on data, and then a multi-year program of change, and of course, the business case and funding. Now, they started out with a $40 million IT initiative, and they ended up with a $25 million business change initiative to accomplish even much more. So that made Treasury Board really quite happy. But let me show you what it looks like. And the top of this is their processes, about 120, 130, I think, something like that. On the bottom, you've got the capabilities, technical capability, and also the information areas. So this was going to be their ideal world. This is where they wanted to go at the end of the day. And so in this particular one, what we were trying to do was integrate a large acquired subsidiary into the main operations. And I can tell you, this was Mars Canada integrating Wrigley. when they acquired Wrigley. And so first thing they had to figure out is what is their confectionery strategy going to be as we have this new lines of business we didn't have before. Then they basically looked at the processes from both sides and basically said, where are the differences? And are we essentially doing the same thing, but maybe doing it slightly differently? But then they went right into organization design. And you didn't see that on the previous ones, because they had to get the organization working as quickly as they possibly could. And then they basically then looked again, standard operating, had to get people working really well. They got by with their own IT stack for a while, and then they said, now let's look at can we bring these two things together based upon the processes and the organization. They then reached out to the customer to change how the relationship went, because before that, Mars would send out a customer account executive to Loblaw, and Wrigley would as well, but there's no point having both of them. So reaching out to customers saying, how is it going to be different? How will we work with you now? They then established a quality management program to make sure the processes could be sustained and they could withstand audit, and because the auditors love those maps. And then they basically gradually worked on the culture change. So again, my point here is that they did everything in the framework, but they did it in a different way because they had to solve a business problem as they're going forward. And so as a result of this, they built this, we call this the cake, because they're part of a corporation. So there's what they do in the middle, operate the business. S&OP means sales and operational planning, which is local, weekly, daily planning. And then there's the corporate and segment guidance. So corporate guidance meaning the corporation in the US basically doing things. So certain work got done in different places. And underneath, the enabling services were the local enabling services, and the global enabling services came through Mars Corporate Services, which is a 7,000 person organization. So basically, what we did is we built this cake, and in the middle, we tried to make it very relatable. And so our client here, and we've used it ever since, our client here called this the marketecture. So because when they showed the detailed models to the executives, they basically got booted out of the office. Nobody wanted to hear it. So they tried to put little three-dimensional pictures on the page, make it something that's really, really simple for them. What do? We make, we sell, we listen. And these are where the main things that we do and how they fit, so that it could be communicated and sold to business people. And since that time, it's been working exceptionally well. The people in the business now are taking much more seriously what happens on the business architecture side. Okay. Now I'm going to show the last one. This is this vehicle asset company, the people who basically run auctions and so on. Without naming names, they really, really have done incredibly well. And their biggest problem is they've done so well, they keep acquiring other companies with other technologies and other views and different ways to market. And so I mean, this was all like physical auction stuff. They acquired an online auctioneer. And the business models are really, really different. And so, but right now, when they started out, they started looking at the IT application architecture because there's so much redundancy and they couldn't get the data being shared. But we sort of pulled them back a bit when they asked us to help out a bit. And we said, let's just step back and say, what are all the concepts? Because you're trying to integrate technologies, but we don't even know what the data is that could be common or should be different. And then from the concept model, we said, well, what are the capabilities we needed? Because the microservices architecture team in EA were well off to the races, having not done any concept definition, not looked at any processes, and not done any capability design. They're off doing microservices. So we had to sort of bring them back and realign them. And then after, we did the process architecture third in the list, whereas other times we did it on first in some of the other examples. And now, because of this, they're really starting to re-examine, do I need all these products and services? Or can I rationalize them and bring them down to fewer? And so Now we're pushing them back to the microservices architecture after that. Change program and organizational renewal, because everything's happening so fast. And I must admit, in this one, we're just trying to catch up to the business, because if we let the business go, they're going to mess it up. And so what we're now fighting is, what is the value of business architecture in here? And it's a tough battle, because you've got different people in the business, all of whom are trying to stake their claim for future promotions in the business. So we have to be incredibly patient going through all of this. We're starting to get some traction, but it's hard. It's really, really hard to sort of sort this out. So again, so different approaches, but don't forget the framework. All these things still need to get done, but we get them done in a maybe a different order, a different depth, right? Is it just a kilometer wide, centimeter deep? On some parts, you have to go a kilometer deep as well. You're going to have to think through what the right strategy is around architecture. So the closing slide, then we have a few questions, I think, is that this is where this expression came from, freedom within the framework. This is Eric Fromm, back in 1935, he said this: true freedom is not the absence of structure, letting employees go off and do whatever they want, but rather a clear structure, but it enables people to work within established boundaries in an autonomous and creative way. And I think as business architects, we have to sort of understand the discipline and the profession, but do what makes sense with regard to the business that we're dealing with right now. So that's the presentation. Please, please, please ask questions. We got a few minutes, yeah. Hopefully it made some sense.
I think so. We had lots of participation. That was great.
Other questions, other observations, things that you might agree with would be good as well. We will. I'll make a copy of the deck available. There'll be some slides I won't put in there, some of the real examples, but the rest of it, yeah.
Just let me know, Roger, which ones are available for distribution. Then
I'll give you a PDF with the right slides in it.
Damien has his hand up.
Yes, it was very, very interesting. Thank you very much. I like all the linkages we make as we are trying to do in business architecture. Some of the graphics, some of the slides were very, very significant, particularly with the process and how we link that to various streams and so on. I just was wondering if there is any, I haven't seen any linkages there to requirements. And I was wondering, what role does that play in the part of, linking to requirements and in particular regards to business process and so on, and
yeah,
and how that links to the enterprise architecture, as business architecture being a domain of it. So I was wondering if any thoughts about that.
Yeah, because so far what I've given you again is a fairly narrow, fairly thin view, but quite wide, which is really what the first part of architecture should do. But quite often when we do that analysis of pain versus gain, then out of that we'll dive into requirements for that particular area. But what we'll try to do, we'll try to make sure the requirements are defined in the context of the process. So when we define the process, there's going to be a start, there's going to be a stop, there's going to be information transformation, there's going to be resources which are used. So when we look at processes, we don't only look at the flow. Like BPMN is okay, but BPMN doesn't give you data flow, and it doesn't give you a very good idea of what are you using to sort of guide and actually do the work. We tend to throw something else in. We didn't talk about it here, that we call IGO, which is input guide output enabler. And the IGO model is really more of an information-centric model, which is a really good basis for doing your requirement, deriving your requirements. And by the way, QualiWare does support IGO charts. You can find it in there somewhere. I'm sure somebody from Close Reach can help you with that. And start to articulate how the actual activity is connected to the rules and the policies and to the resources, human, technological, and so on. So the process architecture should give you the framework for doing that, but those capabilities should be linked to the process, and then the requirements linked to the capabilities. So it's all connected. I just didn't go into the depth of that. It sort of follows what I've talked about.
Thank you.
Any other questions, folks?
Anybody else?
I see there's some comments posted there.
Oh,
Actually, yes, we have a comment from Dragos.
Absence of structure, even within the microcosm of previous word, having a lack of traceability can be a workflow nightmare. Absolutely. Exactly. And it is. I really believe strongly that one of the things we lack the most when we do all this kind of work is context. Within which context are we doing it? So, for example, if I'm doing process work, if I define my process architecture, I should know the opening event and the closing event. And if I'm going to dive into a BPM model, what I've defined in the architecture should be the same as what I'm doing with a skinny circle at the beginning and the fat circle at the end. So I should always be working within the context of the architecture. And when you get to things like measurement, you should be measuring. I want the measurements at the lower level to add up to the measurements at the top. So without the context of the level above, you're going to get into scope creep. Really get into bad scope creep. And so, Kevin, it's Lily, yes, the charting QualiWare, yes, grab it, it's there, and you can connect other things to it.
We will definitely take note of that, Lily. I'll bug Kevin to get that for you.
No problem.
Any other questions or comments, folks? Okay.
Hopefully this has been helpful, interesting. You can always return. Remember, we are as soon as we schedule it, Kevin, we are going to do another business architecture class through QualiWare, and hopefully we'll all be able to do it in person. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
So actually, we were just working on our virtual platform today, so we've got some new things coming down the pipe too to enhance that. But yeah, no, we'll be posting training provided by Process Renewal Group and Roger's team on our site shortly. And if anybody would like Roger's services on a consulting basis, please reach out to me, and I'm sure we can arrange that.
We do these days. We're doing a lot of coaching.
Yep.
Just helping guide people through a few hours here and there.
Great.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much, Roger. Very much appreciated.
And before we
go ahead, Kevin.
Before we go, maybe talk about the next meeting.
Oh yes, absolutely. Before we go, this meeting was recorded and will be posted on our YouTube channel. Our next QualiWare Users Group meeting is going to be the last Monday of March. So we will be officially in spring at that point. And we have lined up Louise Harris to speak at that session. And Kevin, you want to tell us a little bit about what that's going to be?
Sure. So we have Roger here, from the West Coast talking this month, and Louise is on the Rock on the East Coast for next month. So we're getting
Kevin. She is from Vancouver. You know that.
Yeah, I know, but I don't think she'd move back. I don't think she'd move back.
No, she has to look after the goats.
That's right. Yes, Louise we can talk about goats with Louise next month. Anyhow, Louise actually is really, become a specialist in organizational transformation and change management. And so she's going to be talking about, how you take that into your organization and make it part of your organization to achieve the desired outcomes, engaging the right people, in designing that change, mitigating the risk, and figuring out what your really critical success factors are. So, designing change with more success and less stress. So that'll be the topic for next month. And I think it'll be just as entertaining as Roger was today. So thank you very much, Roger.
Thank you, Kevin.
And Kevin, we also have a webinar coming up on March the 10th for call center optimization, if you'd like to mention that as well.
Yes, so we have Mike Haley and Mike Seeger are putting together a bit of a webinar talking about, they've actually built out some interesting contact center and call center models in CBP. So they'll be talking about how to use some of the principles around Interact Coach and the collaborative business planning tool set to improve and to help manage the call center and contact center space from a resourcing and costing point of view. So looking forward to that. And information about that is up on the CBP website as well as the Close Reach website.
And we will see you all again next month.
Thank you
Thanks,
very much,
everyone.
Lucille.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks.
Hope you enjoyed it.
Thanks,
you.
Kevin.
See you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
See you later.